Mr. Speaker. Almighty God, we give thanks for the blessings which have been bestowed on us. Laying aside all personal interests, we acknowledge the King and pray for guidance in our deliberations, that we may conduct the affairs of this House with wisdom, justice, mercy and humility for the welfare and peace of New Zealand. Amen. This is an important occasion. We're just going to pause for a few minutes. As there's been a little bit of congestion in getting people into the gallery, so we'll just take 5 minutes to make sure that happens appropriately. Okay. Looks like we're about full. Can we just have silence in the galleries from this point? Thank you. And welcome to all of you who've come here today for this historic occasion. The Business Committee has determined that the Prime Minister will deliver the Crown apology to the survivors of abuse in state care. And that speech will be followed by a speech by the Leader of the Opposition. And at the conclusion of the two speeches, there will be a waiata. I call on the Honourable Prime Minister, Right Honourable Chris Luxon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Nā kura morehau, kua ngaro haere atu rā. Nā kura morehau e whakawhaiti nei. Kei nā rangatira, tēnā koutou katoa. I'd like to welcome you all here today in what is a significant, sorrowful, but a very important day for you and for all of New Zealand. I would also like to acknowledge all of those that are watching and listening in all around the country. I know that this day has been a long time coming.
Tū tangata, ki hau Māori ora. Mr. Prime Minister, it is your friend and brother,
Out he goes.
Sir, I want to acknowledge you, sir.
Leave the house
that
now.
You have been chosen as the man to deliver the healing.
Leave the gallery now.
To get the healing, we need Jesus Christ back in this parliament.
No, calm.
How can we heal without Jesus Christ back in this parliament and the founding faith
Goodbye.
of this nation, Christianity? So, sir, I ask you, sir, as a survivor and someone who has overcome, sir,
Please remove the gentleman from the gallery.
who has kicked Jesus Christ.
Where are the police and why aren't they here?
Back to where he belongs, sir. Make New Zealand great, sir. I thank you, sir, respectfully. Thank you, sir. I respect you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. And I thank everybody here today.
Good, on your way.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Make New Zealand great.
Goodbye.
Make New Zealand whole again. And to Pāti Māori, stop the division. Stop the division, Pāti Māori. Stop the division. To my family and to Pāti Māori, stop the
On you
division.
go.
We are
On you
one
go.
New Zealand. We are one New Zealand.
Might I express to everyone in the gallery our disappointment that your day has begun with such an unacceptable interruption. You know that you come here with goodwill, having put up with so much in your lives and how important today is. Accordingly, I'll ask the Right Honourable Prime Minister to begin his contribution once again.
Well, I would like to welcome you all here today, as I said, in what is a significant, sorrowful, but very important day for you and for our country. Today I stand before you as the representative of not only this government, but of all the governments that have gone before us to offer a formal and unreserved apology for the abuse that you suffered while in state care, churches and other faith-based places. It was horrific. It was heartbreaking, it was wrong, and it should never have happened. For many of you, it changed the course of your life, and for that, the government must take responsibility. I have said it before, but I thank you again for telling New Zealand with clarity and with honesty of what happened to you. The Royal Commission of Inquiry into the abuse in state care was the largest, the longest, and the most complex public inquiry ever held in New Zealand. More than 2,400 of you were incredibly brave and shared your experiences of the abuse that you suffered while in state care, churches, and other faith-based places. Places where you should have been safe and treated with dignity and respect and compassion. But instead, you were subjected to horrific abuse and neglect and in some cases torture. In 16 devastating volumes, page after page, your stories left many of us stunned that this could have happened here in New Zealand. But not you. You knew the truth because you lived it, and you have waited and waited for people to start listening to you. Now New Zealand has listened, and words do matter, and I say these words with sincerity. I have read your stories, and I believe you. It is my duty as the current Prime Minister to formally recognise that the abuse that you suffered should have never happened. Recognition that is long overdue. Today I'm apologising on behalf of the government to everyone who suffered abuse, harm and neglect while in state care. Today make this apology to all survivors on behalf of my own and previous governments. You deserved so much better, and I am deeply sorry that New Zealand did not do better by you. I am sorry that you were not believed when you came forward to report your abuse. I am sorry that many bystanders, staff, volunteers and carers turned a blind eye and failed to stop or report abuse. I am sorry that the state's oversight of people in care was so poor. I am sorry that many abusers were not made to face justice, which meant that other people experienced abuse that could have been prevented. I am sorry that the state did not act quickly and boldly enough to put much better protection in place for people in all care locations, and that those acting on behalf of the Crown lost sight of you, the people behind the claims. Everyone in care was vulnerable to abuse, but some people suffered even more because of who they are and were. Many Māori, Pacific, deaf and disabled people suffered harsher treatment than others. Māori and Pacific children suffered racial discrimination and disconnection from their families, language and culture. Blind children were denied access to Braille books. Deaf children were punished for using sign language. Children and vulnerable adults with intellectual disabilities were not supported to learn or communicate. Some children and adults in care were targeted because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. Some mothers were pressured or coerced by the state to give up their babies for adoption, often leading to long years of mental suffering for them and their children that they were forced to give up. To all of you, I am sorry. I acknowledge the abuse had a devastating impact, not only on you, but also the people closest to you, your partners, children and grandchildren. Some parents were told that putting their children into state care was the right thing to do. Very often it was not. To those parents, I am sorry that we did not care for your children as if they were our own. To those of you who were tortured at Lake Alice, young, alone and subjected to unimaginable pain, I am deeply sorry. I'd like to acknowledge those that are not alive to hear this apology. Today we feel you are here with us, and I extend this apology to you, your families and whānau. I want to acknowledge those of you who struggled to get help from government agencies when you came forward to report your abuse. This has meant that you have had to relive your trauma over and over again. Agencies should have done better and must commit to doing so in the future. Many of you were denied knowledge of what happened to you because record keeping during your time in care was so poor or deliberately inaccurate. Your own personal information was often withheld, destroyed, lost, or wrong, or incomplete. Often there was no record of your origins, your family and whānau, the harm that you experienced, the complaints that you made, your medical treatments, or what social workers said about you. I am sorry. And I stand alongside the chief executives from 7 government agencies who have this morning apologised for the failings and omissions by their own agencies and departments. Some faith-based organisations are making their own apologies. I strongly encourage them all to do so, to honour the survivors who were abused while in their care. The government has written to church leaders to let them know our expectation is that they will do the right thing and they will contribute to the redress process. No apology can right the wrongs of the past, and some of you may feel that my words count for little after so long and after so much hurt. But one of my hopes is that today, with this apology and this acknowledgement of your burden, it becomes a little lighter for you. Clearly, words must be accompanied by actions. And for me, there are 2 big lessons from the Royal Commission of Inquiry that we must act on quickly and we must act on thoroughly. First, we must do the right thing by you and provide you with the support that you need. Second, we must do all that we can to prevent abuse happening in the future. It is important to note that not all care was abusive and certainly not all caregivers. There are many New Zealanders who have formed loving and lifelong bonds with the foster families who have opened their doors and hearts to them. And I do want to thank those who have provided loving and appropriate care in the past and those that continue to do so today. The Royal Commission itself said that by 1999 there had been improvements to the care system. But we must do better. We must do better at improving the experience of those in care, and we must do better at ensuring fewer people end up in state care in the first place. The Royal Commission made 138 recommendations for change. The government is carefully considering each of those recommendations. And I am heartened at the words of support from the Leader of the Opposition and also the other parties in this Parliament to put politics to one side and to work together to achieve lasting change. Today I want to provide you with some more detail about our intentions. The government's response is focused in 3 areas. Firstly, acknowledging the abuse through the tabling of the report and this formal apology. Secondly, supporting survivors. And thirdly, preventing abuse from happening in the future. I am pleased to announce today that the government has already completed or started work on 28 recommendations in the report. And to demonstrate our commitment to change, this afternoon, a bill that will introduce a range of measures to improve the safety of children and vulnerable adults in state care will have its first reading here in Parliament. I know that financial redress is important to many of you, and no amount of money will ever make up for what you have endured. But today I want to provide you with some details around the next steps. Many of you understandably do not want to engage with the current redress system. Some parts of it are 20 years old and it can take up to 5 years for your claims to be addressed. However, there are also 3,500 of you who are engaging with the current system. So today I'm announcing the government will invest an additional $32 million to increase capacity in the current system while we work quickly on the new redress system. This funding will increase resources and help ensure the system is more responsive to your needs now. But I also want to assure you today that it is our intention to have a new single redress system operating next year. And while financial redress is important to some of you, others of you are looking for easier access to support services. And so the government will establish a $2 million fund that will support organisations that are already working well with you as survivors. And this will help you to navigate and access the support that you need more easily. One of the most important things we can do in light of the Royal Commission of Inquiry is to improve the safeguards to prevent the abuse of children and vulnerable adults in care. The system has already improved markedly since the 50-year period to 1999 that the Royal Commission focused upon. Back then, many people who in care were in large institutions. Today, the vast majority are in the care of households or small-scale community-based care places. There have been improvements in areas like professional standards, staff training and vetting, and complaints procedures. But the Royal Commission made a number of recommendations around further improvements which the government will carefully consider. We have started the process to remove the ability to strip search children in care, provide new search powers for people visiting youth justice facilities, and to strengthen restrictions for people working with young children. We will also change the Crimes Act to better recognise disabled people and will improve record keeping in government agencies. And I want to thank the other political parties for their support in progressing this bill in the House today. I know that raising public awareness to help prevent future abuse is important to you, as for decades many of you suffered in silence. Today I'm announcing a National Remembrance Day will be held on November 12 next year to mark the one-year anniversary of this apology, and this will provide us with an opportunity to stop and to reflect on what you have endured and to ensure that we are doing all that we can to prevent future abuse. Today I can also tell you we will start working on removing immediately memorials, including street names, public amenities and public honours of proven perpetrators. We will also work with local authorities to honour and to care for unmarked graves located on sites that were places of care in New Zealand. Before I close, I want to say that to have hope, however bleak your circumstances, is an important part of being human. I know there are survivors among you who have managed to overcome what happened to you and have gone on to lead full lives and have ensured abuse was never part of your own children's lives. And I applaud breaking that cycle that too often hangs like a curse over families. It does not mean you have forgotten or forgiven what occurred. However, you have been able to pierce the darkness with the light of hope and work through what you have endured to take opportunities and to find pleasure in life. My hope is that today allows more of you to find a little more light, because while today is about your past, it is also about your future. It is also about the future of others who may find themselves in care. They will have a better experience thanks to your voice, your courage and your persistence. It is on all of us now to do all that we can to ensure that abuse that should never have been accepted no longer occurs. And that will be an enduring legacy of your contribution to changing the system and this and future government's commitment to implementing that change. I would like to say again and to thank all of those who told their stories. You have been heard and you have been believed. You have helped achieve what you must have wished for yourselves: better protection to prevent the suffering of vulnerable and voiceless people. I would like to acknowledge those of you, the wounded healers, who despite the trauma that you have been through yourselves, have helped to advocate for other survivors. That is selfless. I thank the Royal Commission, staff and commissioners. I thank all of those continuing to work on this response. I'd also like to thank the Leader of the Opposition, Chris Hipkins, and all of the other political parties who have worked with us on this day. I also want to thank those many, many good people in social services who go out day after difficult day to try to help to protect those who are in danger, to strengthen those who are weak, and to support those who are vulnerable. Finally, to you, the survivors of abuse and care, I hope this apology may help your healing. What happened is part of your life story, but not the only part. This apology, which you may each take as personal, is now part of your story too. I'd like to end with a karakia from Waihoroi Shortland. Your truth we are challenged to uphold. Your courage we are bound to honour. And your right to be heard we receive with privilege. Nō reira rā, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
Right Honourable Chris Hipkins.
Kia hiwa rā, kia hiwa rā, kia hiwa rā ki tēnei tuku. Kia hiwa rā ki tera tuku, kia tū, kia oho, kia matara, ti hei Māori ora. Ki te hunga, kua riro ki te pō, moi mai, moi mai, moi mai rā koutou. Ki ngā moruhu, kua tae mai tēnā koutou. Koutou ngā moruhu, I mā taki mai nā, e whakarongo mai nā. Huri noa I te motu, tēnā koutou. He tū whakaiti tēnei, ki te whakapaha atu. Kia koutou ngā moruhu, mō ngā tene tu kinotanga, ngā tai mahatanga me te mamai, au e taukuri e. Mr. Speaker, can I start by acknowledging and fully supporting the words of the Prime Minister and delivering the formal apology on behalf of successive governments who have failed you, survivors, your families, whānau, kāinga, hapu, iwi, your communities, your support networks, and New Zealand as a nation. I want to acknowledge all of you, those who are physically here at Parliament today, those who are watching all across the country, those who find it too painful to engage in this process at all, and those who have died before today finally arrived. Among the communities of survivors are many intersecting communities who have jointly suffered from neglect, from abuse, from trauma, from torture, and they have carried their scars over lifetimes and over generations. Māori survivors, Pacific survivors, Pākehā survivors, deaf survivors, disabled survivors, survivors who experienced mental distress. Takatapui, Mahu, Whakasalewa, Palopa, Whawhawhine, Akavaine, Whakaletea, Whakawhawhine, and all rainbow survivors. Today is a hugely important day for all of you to finally hear what the Crown has failed to give you for all of these years, an apology. It's a hugely important day for us, the representatives of the Crown and of successive governments, that we finally acknowledge the thousands of confronting experiences of neglect, abuse, trauma, torture, and that we finally own up fully to our failings and offer our sincerest apologies. We are sorry. Today, all of Aotearoa New Zealand will bear witness to the truth, to what survivors experienced, to our decades of willful ignorance, denial, minimisation, and to our conviction to end such horror and vile acts from continuing. As the Royal Commission found, around 250,000 people were abused and an even higher, untold number neglected. We will never know that true number. Many people entering into state and faith-based institutions were undocumented. Records were incomplete. They've gone missing, and in some cases, yes, they were deliberately destroyed. Every corner of New Zealand has been affected by this abuse. A family member, a neighbour, a colleague, a friend. In 2018, we started the long overdue process of acknowledging that the abuse happened, and so we could hear from those who have had to live with the repercussions of that. To those who shared your stories with the inquiry, thank you. To those who've chosen not to recount those memories, we wholeheartedly understand. To those who died before they were given the opportunity to be heard, rest knowing that you are heard today. I give my thanks to all of those who were involved, to the commissioners, assisting counsel, to the survivor advisory group of exports. I can name but a handful, but my gratitude goes out to everyone who was instrumental in this inquiry. It was an enormous task. While necessary and welcomed, for many the inquiry and the associated events stir up and exacerbate the pain and the suffering, and I know that for many today will be painful. The things that we speak about today rise from the worst of human nature. They show us how immoral and reprehensible it is that we as the Crown not only allowed it to happen and ignored it, but further punished those who spoke out. I want you to hear that we have heard. That while we can never fully understand what these experiences were like for you, we have heard your testimonies. The Royal Commission shows us that many survivors who entered state or faith-based care and institutions were forced into them due to discriminatory attitudes and harsh conditions that were beyond their control. Racism, ableism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, and cruel attitudes towards people who simply needed support. What these people, what you, the survivors and your loved ones experienced, spans an unimaginable spectrum of horror. Horror perpetuated within a system that allowed it by people who you should have been able to trust. Caregivers, staff, peers, other residents, police, medical practitioners, teachers, social workers, nurses, nuns, priests, and religious ministers. You lived without care, affection, love, emotional support, and connection. Many of you experienced psychological and emotional neglect and abuse, being institutionalised and denied your personhood. Physical and sexual abuse and violence was a common experience. Many were deprived of an education or punished for having special needs. Deaf survivors were punished for using sign language. Blind survivors punished for using echolocation. Survivors also experienced physical neglect. They were denied food, shelter, water, basic hygiene. Female survivors often denied menstrual products. Many were placed in solitary confinement, often for long periods of time, and neglected whilst there. Survivors were not allowed to express who they were, and they were often punished when they did so. Too many were neglected medically, yet also subject to unnecessary and invasive procedures without consent, and some of you were tortured. All of this at the hands of state and faith-based institutions that were entrusted with providing care and protection to you. Taonga, who should have been loved and nurtured. Not only has this immeasurable harm and trauma hurt you, the children, young people and vulnerable adults who experienced it directly, but also your families, your whānau, your kāinga, your hapu, iwi and communities. The intergenerational and collective harm caused cannot be overstated. Survivors were often targeted based on race, sexual orientation, disability and gender, and isolated from their cultures, their language, their sense of self, and from their families. Māori survivors found themselves in a system that inherently worked against them and care settings that were blatantly racist. Many Māori survivors were made to feel whakamā, shame at having been stripped of their identity as Māori. Whakapapa and mana motahaki were transgressed and people were severed from their whānau. marae, hapu, iwi, lost people who would otherwise be sitting on the taumata or the pai, passing on cultural knowledge. Pacific survivors were punished for who they were, with their cultural needs in existence not only neglected, but actively destroyed. There are stories of Pacific survivors who were told they didn't belong in this world and that they had no identity. For Pacific survivors, it was not only being actively dislocated from their kāinga communities and church, but also the harm experienced in various institutions that breached the wa'a, resulting in shame, isolation, and an inability to fully embrace life. Pākehā survivors were similarly removed from their families, actively isolated from them, and often for nothing more than being poor. Pākehā survivors have suffered lifelong dislocation and disconnection from family and community. Their identity and mana also diminished. We should never overlook the horrors they endured. Deaf survivors were seen as lesser, forced to communicate only orally. They suffered under ordism and ableist attitudes, and they were punished if they were caught using sign language. Education centres for deaf New Zealanders, like Van Ash College and Kelston School for the Deaf, should have been safe spaces. Instead, they became a hellscape for students where physical and sexual abuse were rife. Students were constantly belittled, others made to feel inferior. Disabled survivors were shut away, stigmatised and devalued for being disabled. They faced all types of abuse and extreme neglect. In their interviews with the inquiry, disabled survivors said that abuse and neglect caused them to lose their sense of self, their personhood, the essence of being human, and connections to their families, communities, culture, and language. Mentally distressed survivors were shut away in institutions and experienced the full spectrum of abuse, neglect, and trauma that were par for the course in these places. Nothing they experienced was therapeutic or addressed their needs. Rainbow survivors were forced into institutions and psychiatric wards engulfed in homophobia, where they were mislabelled with different mental health illnesses. Conversion practices were rife as a means to cure or to fix survivors, including the use of electric shocks. One such institution that used electric shocks and hurt broke and tortured those who passed through their doors. That was the Lake Alice Psychiatric Hospital, a name now synonymous with the experience of trauma and a shameful part of New Zealand's history. The horrors committed there and in similar places remain some of the darkest in our history. Churches and other faith-based entities were also spaces where many suffered. They abused their power to harm people who they were entrusted to care. Priests, ministers, and other religious leaders, those who should have been trusted, devolved into monsters behind closed doors, and they must also equally be held to account. Successive Labour governments, ministers, ministries, and state institutions had a role to play in this neglect, this abuse, this trauma, this torture. They allowed systems they governed to continue to place children, young people, and vulnerable adults in care unnecessarily, and to hurt them while they were there. When survivors tried to raise the alarm, representatives of Labour also played a role in ignoring, punishing, and shaming survivors, drowning them out so they could never be heard. That was wrong. So today I want to tell you on behalf of successive Labour governments, we also formally and unreservedly say sorry for the neglect, abuse, trauma and torture that took place in state and faith-based care institutions. And we apologise for ignoring you, for punishing you for speaking out, and for leaving you unsafe and unheard. Today I want to confirm that we hear you, we hear all of you, and we are sorry that that took so long. To each and every one of you who endured all that suffering, to your families, your children, mokopuna, your kāinga, your hapu, your iwi, your communities, we see your scars and we hear you, and we are sorry. You should have been safe, protected and believed, and you were not. And that is the ultimate injustice that we as representatives of the Crown must also bear the burden of. I am sorry that the last Labour government did not act more quickly to put in place an independent redress system. We, the government and representatives of the Crown, owe a huge debt to you. Redress has taken far, far too long, to the point where many have already died or fear they might do so before getting any compensation. Redress should be kept out of the court system, and it should be seen as an investment in our people. It's a national disgrace that it has taken us too long. I want to confirm that for the serious matter of redress and compensating survivors, we're taking the politics off the table. We're committing to finally paying back this debt. We welcome the government's action to streamline that process, and we stand ready to work together to get this done as quickly and as efficiently as possible. There will be a big bill, but it's nothing compared to the debt that we owe those survivors. And it must not be the reason for any further delay. I'm under no illusions that neglect, abuse and trauma in state care still happens today. For this apology to have any credibility, we must take concrete action to stop it. You've heard words before, and now you want action. I hear you. One of the many things that sticks with me from reading the report and from the accounts that we heard this morning is that survivors emphasise time and again that they don't want what happened to them to happen to one more person. For many of you, this is just an important part of seeking justice, and we have enormous work to do. The inquiry and this apology must be a turning point, a point from which to embark on a pathway for us to not only right these historic wrongs, but also fundamentally change our care system. Change it so that state care is really necessary. When I met with Keith Whiffen to discuss my speech, he said to me, the best prevention for abuse in state care is to keep people out of it in the first place. And I wholeheartedly agree. But when people are in care, it should be a safe and warm space for all, as it should always have been. We welcome and support the government's commitment in beginning the work to improve the safeguards for those in state care. There is much work to do, and we must not waste one more day. We also support the government's work to work with local authorities to honour the unmarked graves and to remove the names of proven perpetrators from public places. For the guilty who remain nameless, we encourage the government to ensure that all is done to hold those perpetrators to account. I want to acknowledge in closing that for some, and perhaps many of you, there will never be healing and closure. My hope is that this apology today offers at least some relief, that your fight to be heard has resulted in this apology. Now is the time to forge a new pathway forwards. The Royal Commission set out survivors' dreams for the future. He Mara Tipu, a garden of growth, where every child, young person and adult is loved, safe and cared for in a manner that supports their growth and development into a thriving contributor to society. That's my dream too, and I hope that together we can achieve it for generations to come and never ever again repeat the mistakes of the past. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
Whānau, I understand. The House is suspended until 2 p.m.
Well, kia ora. Good afternoon, everybody. We'll try and be fairly brief in this session just because Erica and I both need to and want to attend lunch with the survivors that are here in Parliament today. As you have seen, today is a very significant and emotional day actually here in Parliament. Again, I'd like to offer a formal and unreserved apology on behalf of the government and previous governments as well to everyone who suffered abuse, harm and neglect while in care. A terrible injustice was done in the name of the state, and for that we must take responsibility. I'd also like to thank the survivors for coming here to Parliament today and for sharing their stories also with the Royal Commission. Your bravery will lead to change. As you know, the government has started or completed 28 recommendations in the Royal Commission report. We will have the first reading of the Responding to Abuse and Care Legislation Amendment Bill this afternoon. This bill includes a range of measures to improve safety and safeguards in state care. The government will now work on the Commission's other recommendations and also provide a full response next year, early next year. With that, Erica and I are happy to take any questions you may have.
Message from survivors this morning. People have been talked of meaningless words. Chapman said that the government had divided survivors, picking and choosing when the government wants them involved. How do you respond to that?
Look, I understand there is a, you know, I've spent time with some in the survivor community already. There is a range of perspectives, as you can understand. We're dealing with 50 years of abuse in state care. Everyone has a different experience of that. What I would say is that our government is taking this responsibility incredibly seriously. We arrived very quickly, understood or saw the 95 recommendations in the interim report. Very quickly, a couple of months after that, came the 138 recommendations in the final report. Right from the receipt of that and the detailing of it in Parliament on July 24th, we've been working incredibly hard. But I understand, we are working hard to make sure we acknowledge and that the stories are heard and are brought to the attention of New Zealanders and apologise properly for that. We're making sure that we can actually support survivors better, and there's a lot more work for us to do in that space, as we've talked about yesterday and again today. And importantly, we've got to prevent the abuse happening again. And so, those three legs is the way we've structured the work as we, as a team of ministers, work our way through it.
Having heard their feedback, is there anything you would do differently about how you've conducted today's event?
Well, I'm proud of actually how we've conducted the event. We've worked with all the parties here in Parliament to make sure that we can undertake a formal, authentic, unreserved apology to the survivors and to those that were abused in state care. And I think you've hopefully got a sense of we have been engaging with the community. I think the Minister's done an exceptionally good job of doing so, and also working with her colleagues to make sure that we have meaningful change and implement that change. For many of the victims and survivors, I've received letters from them. I receive encouragement from them saying, look, they appreciate what we're doing, but I can tell you, we really appreciate what they've done and coming forward in the way that they have and putting our voice to their stories.
Do you acknowledge that by holding the event at a venue that can't accommodate everyone that wanted to be here, you've caused further harm in that community?
Well, again, we've worked really hard to make sure that while we spoke to survivors about it, maybe Eric, you want to talk about the co-locations as well?
Yeah, like I do. One of the recommendations in the Royal Commission's report was to hold it here at Parliament, and we agonised over that because we all knew that we weren't going to be able to get everyone in. And I tasked the Crown Response Unit to make sure that they were talking to survivors and getting their feedback, and frankly, survivors were split. Some survivors were very adamant that it had to be here for all time on Hansard, and others wanted it at different locations. And so in the end, we sided with the Royal Commission, which suggested that we do have it here. It was one of their recommendations, but also made sure that we held it at different events. And I also want to thank those who have held a concurrent event at Papatia Marae as well.
So the survivors that spoke after the CEOs gave their apology, a couple of them noted that you weren't in the room. Why did you not attend that?
Look, I was there earlier, obviously, in the beginning. I needed to step away after the morning tea and before the event in Parliament just to prepare for my remarks. I'm spending time with them again today. I have spent time with the survivor groups when they've been here in Parliament, and also I've actually met with survivors independently and individually and privately in their own homes since the report was tabled as well. So I will continue to do that. I'll continue to stay very engaged with the survivors and actually hearing what their experiences are. And obviously, Erica and our ministers were present present at their hearing those 3 stories of their accounts, and I have read all 3,000 pages of that report and it's pretty traumatic stuff. So again, I wasn't able to be there just given in terms of preparing for the remarks in Parliament, but I am spending time with them today in the morning and also again in lunch.
They're also telling you to put your money where your mouth is. Do you commit to giving survivors what they deserve in terms of compensation, no matter the cost to the Crown?
Well, again, we're taking financial redress incredibly seriously. You've seen us already in 3.5 months move to try and support Lake Alice survivors in particular. You've heard us today say we're putting $32 million into the current system. It's imperfect. It's been in place for 20 years, but actually there are things that we know that we can do to improve that experience right now for people who are in that process. And then thirdly, what we've said is we are determined to make sure that we have an independent financial redress system, which we'll talk about early next year.
Cost being prohibitive.
Well, again, our conversations have been about first principles and the design of that redress system, and so it's important we have those conversations here as a government, but also importantly with the survivors as well.
Prime Minister, you've got your Attorney General Judith Collins, your Solicitor General Erna Jargos have been directly involved with the denial and the cover-up of the torture and rape and abuse of children. Is it appropriate that you've got the Crown's 2 top lawyers in those positions given their past involvement?
Well, look, I mean, I've heard the concerns really clearly. The Solicitor General, as you know, has apologised in 2021 and also in 2024. As she has said, there is no way that our response was survivor-centric or survivor at all, and as a result, Crown Law in this case has made changes, as have other agencies that we would expect as well. So, the reality is that is it
appropriate that they remain in their jobs given their involvement?
Well, again, as I said, Solicitor General has apologised. She's given a personal apology about the fact that she may have been doing her job, but wasn't representing those survivors in those conversations, and so and changes have been made on the back of that.
So if you can ask her to personally apologise.
Well, again, what I'd say is that if you think about the torture process through the UN, what I'd say is that that was a case where the decision was made in 2018, and our government acknowledged that in 2024. We take that very seriously, and I don't mean to. The reality is there has been multiple failings over multiple governments over multiple years from multiple agencies. That has been unequivocally what we have communicated in the apology and also upon receipt of the report. The state has failed over multiple governments, over multiple decades, in multiple agencies.
What about accountability? Why should she continue to have the Attorney General role when she's previously made statements that torture didn't happen?
Well, again, in terms of the Crown, the state has said that we didn't get it right, and I'm being really upfront about that. Our ministers of successive governments before us, different agency CEOs and heads, the state failed outright in its response to survivors. It's unequivocal, and so I can't be any clearer than that.
By keeping her in that role, is your current government continuing to fail?
No, our government's taking these recommendations incredibly seriously, and the fact that we have, responded to 28 of the 138 recommendations in 3.5 months, and if you could see the amount of work that's going on with the ministers that are involved, led by Erica and the team, there is huge work. We take this really seriously. We have done from day one, from when the report was tabled. It was important that people know that they are believed and they are heard. But importantly,
cover up.
Well, importantly, what we've said is that there's, the state over successive governments, over multiple decades and multiple agencies and multiple years, failed outright, and we've said that up front. And we've apologised, and that's what today's about. And today's about making sure that we can prevent that abuse from happening again, that every agency going forward. Well, yes, I do. I think we're working incredibly hard to actually take seriously the recommendations from the Royal Commission, and you're seeing that.
Erna Jargos' speech.
In terms of the recommendations that we've got going in before the House today with the bill that we've got, that is a sign that we're taking it seriously.
Prime Minister
Yes, I understand that.
Chris Hipkins has said in the House that there will be a big bill
for redress, but that pales in comparison to the debt that we owe survivors. Do you hold the same sentiment, and will your government commit to proper redress despite the cost?
Well, again, our focus has been on doing two things. One is to make sure we are supporting the survivors, and financial redress and compensation is a key part of that, as well as access to social services. You've seen us respond quite quickly, I think, in the last 3 months around the Lake Alice survivors. You've seen us say today we want to strengthen the existing system because there are things that we can do immediately to improve that and to make that easier for the 3,500 people that are in that system. And we've committed very strongly to make sure that we build out a single redress system that we are working incredibly hard on, but it's complex work, and we want to get that right, and we'll talk more about that in 2025.
Prime Minister and Minister as well, I appreciate an answer on this. You talked about going into first principles when it comes to redress. How do you even begin to think about how much a ruined life is worth? How do you even start to?
Well, you have to start with the assumption that no amount of compensation or money makes any of this acceptable to anybody. That is the starting point. There is just no amount of money that makes any of this right or acceptable whatsoever. So that is the reality of it. And then starting from there, right, well, what can we do and what should we be doing and how can we deliver it? You have to understand, we talk about thousands of people who've had thousands of individualised and different experiences. So how do we deliver a system that actually can deliver for as many people as possible, acknowledging that not everyone's going to be 100% happy with the system, irrespective of what we design.
Cost is a factor, though, isn't it?
Sorry?
Cost will be a factor for the government.
It will be in due course as to what we can ultimately afford, but the point is that's not the starting point. That genuinely hasn't been.
Are you willing to acknowledge proactively that torture occurred at facilities outside Lake Alice Hospital's Child and Adolescent Unit?
Look, in the work that I've been doing with Lake Alice, I've sought legal advice and sought the advice from many people around this because it has been raised with me. I sought the advice of Crown Law and others, and they have assured me that they have looked through all of the findings of the Royal Commission and they have looked into other cases that have been brought forward, and at this stage they are confident that the threshold that has to be met for that torture to occur, which is a UN definition, they do not believe has been met anywhere else. And that's the advice that I've had, but I followed that up immediately once it was raised with me.
What about Port Cherry Farm, Oakley Hospital?
Yes, those were the institutions that I have raised with officials and with Crown Law, and they were the ones that they went away and looked at, and in terms of the Crown response work, and have come back to me and said that they do not believe it meets the threshold. While it was horrific and terrible for those people, there is a set definition by the United Nations, and they do not believe that it meets that. But while I say that, I don't want to diminish what happened to those people because it was still, unimaginably awful.
Have you sought independent advice outside of Crown Law, given their tainted record?
I have sought advice outside of Crown Law, yes.
Minister Stanford, in terms of the interim funding for the existing redress system, there's been quite a lot of concern from survivors about interacting with the current redress protocols. Do you have assurances that they're happy to continue working with that redress scheme?
But this is, as we've said, a short-term measure because we're working at pace on what the new system looks like. I would say that the Royal Commission report states that in the past, over the last 20 years, we haven't got everything right with the redress system that exists. There have been many things that have been changed, the rapid payments, the better case management. In fact, I met with 2 survivors just recently, one of them who said the case management that they had in terms of someone listening to them, answering their questions, finding their records, guiding them through the process was actually incredible. I've also sat down with those MSD workers and relayed that in my office, and I've said to them, right, we need to make sure we can speed up the process even more. With those rapid claims, it does take between 6 and 8 weeks. Once you get to the front of the queue, it's getting to the front of the queue that's a problem because, as the Prime Minister has said, 5 years is not acceptable. There are people who want to be in this process. They want that to end now because many of them are very unwell. And so it's important for us to make sure while we're redesigning what new looks like, those people are sitting there and they cannot wait. So that's why
Are rapid payments enough? Are those rapid payments enough? They're 30 grand.
Well, there's a Well, there's a range. There's also an individualised pathway as well, and so if you look at the range of payments, it's over quite a significant difference.
Yeah, for someone who's wrongfully imprisoned in New Zealand, the guidelines are 150 per year. You're giving survivors of state care whose childhoods were ripped away from them $30,000 overall.
Well, these are the discussions, and as I think Luke alluded to earlier, these are the very difficult discussions and the very complex discussions that we're having, and then we'll continue to have.
To the wrongful imprisonment.
I'm not going to give you any indications of where we're going to end up, because we're still having those discussions, and it would be inappropriate for me to do so.
Through the fast track process that's currently out.
The rapid payment process.
Rapid payment.
There's two different processes at the moment. Individualised.
Where do they stand once the redress?
Those, again, are discussions that we are still in the middle of, and I think that's why it gives you an idea of the incredible complexities of what we're having to work through and why it's taking some time. But I did say yesterday, you remember the things we've done already, setting up the Crown Response Office with the Chief Executive, getting the Lake Alice, some of that Lake Alice work underway. We've had two announcements already with more to come, because we did say that we would prioritise Lake Alice, and we will. We've done a huge amount of work with these 28 recommendations that we're acknowledging, the meaningful actions that we're undertaking, the apology today. There has been a huge amount of work, but I think you recognise the complexity of the redress that we have to set up, not only a new unit, but all of these individual decisions that we have to come to are extraordinarily complex, and we're working our way.
Important though, because survivors will be wanting to know whether they should apply to the current scheme, or if they hold out, might they be eligible for more compensation?
I think the point is they have already put their name forward, 3,500 of them. They want to go through this process, and we want to get them through as quickly as we can.
And 4,000 have already been processed.
More. If they get the money now, can they then go to the new compensation process and be topped up if it's worth more?
Those are the things that we're working through at the moment. Those are the things we're working through at the moment.
Sorry, Adam, can we go to you last question, then we will need to move to lunch?
Can you just speak to how widespread, as far as the memorials for proven perpetrators, how widespread that is across the country, and what the government work looks like, who leads it, time frames, like practically how that works?
Yeah, they're very spread. They're all over the country. There are certain pockets where there are more than others, as you would expect, and we're going to be working with local councils to make sure that that happens.
And perhaps referring back to a question earlier, and you said yesterday you wanted to get today right. Do you think, given the criticism of the survivors having or making speeches before the apology was made, the reception of the CEs and public sector leaders, are you confident, Minister, that everything went right today, that it went as best as it could?
I think that it did, and I don't think if we'd held that afterwards it would have probably been any different, because the survivors that were there today carry with them a huge amount of pain and hurt, and it didn't matter when you had them speak, you would have had that same reaction. And we knew that when the Chief Executive spoke that we were going to have that reaction, and which is why we let it play out, because actually it was part of what was to happen today, because they have such strong emotions. And it was raw. Mm-hmm. But actually, I think in the end, there were a lot of people there that also had respect for them as well. And I think it went as well as it possibly could have. And I think that when we spoke to the people and we asked them to speak, it was acknowledging that it was beforehand. It wasn't in response. It was really more that they could share their stories and their pain and their journey, so that all of the ministers that were there, my colleagues, could hear it directly from them, and that was incredibly important.
Can you just say whether you think it's fair that survivors are getting paid $30,000? That's a month of your salary, Prime Minister.
Again, Jenna, I know you want to get into the detail of it. We're trying to signal very clearly. We're working through the process. We've made changes already around Lake Alice and torture payments, and we've got more work to do in that space. We've done things that we've taken that we can do that we think can strengthen the existing system, as more people actually have chosen to opt for the rapid payment process. There's 3,500 people in the process. There's 4,000 people that have already been processed. Over the last 20 years, there's been a claims process in place. We know there are challenges with that redress system. That's why we're working at pace to be able to build the new system, as I said, for early 2025. We have more to say about that. I appreciate there's lots of questions and lots of things that we can't answer today, but I can tell you that there is a massive intention, will and drive from our government to do everything we can to make it right, acknowledging that no amount of money is going to make it right, acknowledging that everybody's got individualised circumstances and are in different places. And so, that is what we are working with. It is highly complex. it is highly charged, and we're trying to do that maturely, sensitively, and with pace.
Do you think it's fair?
Okay, thank you very much, guys. Appreciate your time. Thank you.